December 1941. The smoke above Pearl Harbor had barely begun to clear when a dangerous idea took hold inside the Imperial Japanese Navy, the idea that they were unstoppable. In a single morning, carrier-based aircraft had crippled the United States Pacific Fleet. Battleships lay twisted in the harbor mud. Oil burned across the water. American pride bled into the Pacific. To Tokyo, it looked like destiny unfolding exactly as planned. But destiny can be deceptive. The architects of the attack believed they had delivered a psychological earthquake so powerful that Washington would hesitate, negotiate, maybe even accept Japan's dominance in the Pacific. Instead, something else happened. The American fleet did not collapse. It adapted. And yet, aboard the carriers of the Kido Butai, the most powerful naval strike force ever assembled, confidence was absolute. 4 cleat carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, nearly 250 aircraft, veteran pilots who had trained relentlessly for years, honing precision attacks that no navy on Earth could match. These were not ordinary aviators. They were elite, combat-tested, disciplined to perfection. At Pearl Harbor, they had proven what carrier aviation could do. In the months that followed, they swept across the Pacific like a storm. Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies. Everywhere they struck, they won. By the spring of 1942, the Japanese Empire stood at the height of its power. A defensive perimeter stretched thousands of miles. Resource-rich territories were secured. The Americans appeared disorganized, reactive, cautious. So when the plan for Midway was conceived, it felt less like a gamble and more like a final step. Midway Atoll was tiny, a speck in the vast Pacific, but its position mattered. Seize it, and Japan would extend its defensive shield eastward. More importantly, it would force the United States to respond, and that response was exactly what Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto wanted. Because the real objective wasn't the island, it was the American carriers. Those elusive ships had not been at Pearl Harbor, they had survived, and as long as they existed, they were a threat. Yamamoto's strategy was elegant: lure them into battle, ambush them with overwhelming force, and destroy them in one decisive clash. After that, surely America would have no choice but to accept reality. The plan was layered, complex, almost theatrical in its deception. A feint toward the Aleutian Islands would divide American attention. Meanwhile, the main carrier strike force under Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo would approach Midway, launch airstrikes, and wait. When U.S. carriers rushed in to defend the island, they would be annihilated. On paper, it was flawless, and Nagumo believed it. He had every reason to. His carriers represented the cutting edge of naval warfare. His crews operated like a machine. Japanese doctrine emphasized coordinated, concentrated strikes, overwhelming the enemy before he could react. Speed, surprise, aggression. These principles had brought victory again and again. But doctrine can become a cage. By early June 1942, the Japanese fleet cut through the Pacific waters in radio silence. The sea was calm, the sky wide and indifferent. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay Midway. Somewhere beyond that, perhaps, the American carriers. But according to every assumption, every calculation, the Americans were not ready. They had been battered, their morale shaken, their intelligence blind. What Nagumo didn't know, what no one aboard those carriers knew, was that the illusion of surprise had already shattered. Even as the Japanese fleet advanced, American codebreakers in Hawaii had been working in cramped, overheated rooms, piecing together fragments of intercepted messages. Patterns emerged, code names repeated. AF appeared again and again. Midway. The trap Japan believed it was setting was no longer secret. And yet aboard Akagi there was no sense of danger. Officers reviewed flight schedules, pilots joked quietly, deck crews prepared ordnance with meticulous care. The machinery of war functioned with calm precision. Nagumo faced what seemed like a manageable task: neutralize Midway's airfields, maintain air superiority, and be ready for the inevitable American counterattack. Standard procedure, textbook execution. Everything depended on timing. At dawn on June 4th, Japanese aircraft roared off the carrier decks toward Midway. The rising sun glinted off their wings. It must have felt like déjà vu, another preemptive strike, another demonstration of superiority. Reports soon returned. The island was damaged, but not destroyed. A second strike would be necessary. Nagumo now stood at a crossroads. His reserve aircraft sat below deck, some armed with torpedoes for ships, others prepared with bombs for land targets. Doctrine demanded flexibility, be prepared for either scenario. If American ships appeared, torpedoes were essential. If not, the island must be finished. Then came uncertainty. A delayed scout plane report, possible enemy vessels sighted, incomplete information, confusion. The Americans were not supposed to be there. In that moment, Nagumo made a decision that seemed rational, even cautious. Rearm the reserve planes for another strike on Midway. Then, if the sighting proved significant, rearm them again for anti-ship attack. It was careful, it was methodical, it followed doctrine. But war does not forgive caution at the wrong moment. Below deck, hangars became chaos. Ordnance was moved. Fuel lines remained connected. Bombs and torpedoes lay exposed. Aircraft clustered tightly together. The carriers' striking power, their pride, was packed into enclosed steel spaces filled with aviation fuel and explosives. Above them, the sky remained deceptively quiet. Nagumo believed he was controlling events, that he was adapting, that he still held the initiative. But in reality, time was slipping away. Hundreds of miles to the northeast, American carriers were already in position. They had not been lured. They had not been surprised. They were waiting. The illusion of invincibility, born at Pearl Harbor, reinforced by months of victories, still wrapped itself around the Japanese fleet like armor. But armor can crack. And sometimes the most dangerous trap is the one you are certain you are setting for someone else. In less than an hour, that certainty would vanish. The most powerful naval strike force ever assembled was about to discover that the battlefield it thought it controlled had already been claimed by an unseen enemy. The Americans were there, and they were coming. While Admiral Nagumo's carriers sliced through the Pacific in disciplined silence, another battle was already being fought thousands of miles away in a dimly lit basement at Pearl Harbor. There were no explosions there, no roaring engines, no rising sun painted on wings. Only paper, static, and patterns. Inside Station Hypo, a small team of American cryptanalysts leaned over intercepted Japanese radio messages, lines of coded symbols that, at first glance, meant nothing. But war in the 20th century was no longer fought only with guns and steel. It was fought with information. And information, if understood correctly, could be deadlier than bombs. For months, the United States had been struggling to break the Japanese naval code known as JN-25. It was complex, layered, constantly updated. Every message was a puzzle wrapped inside another puzzle. But slowly, painstakingly, fragments began to fall into place. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team noticed something recurring in the intercepts, a location designated only as AF. AF was preparing for attack. AF required additional forces. AF would soon be occupied. The question was simple. What was AF? Some in Washington believed it referred to targets in the South Pacific. Others suspected Alaska. The stakes were enormous. Guess wrong, and the Pacific Fleet would sail straight into darkness. Rochefort had a theory. AF was Midway. But suspicion wasn't proof.
They needed confirmation. So they devised something audacious, almost playful in its simplicity. Midway would transmit an unencrypted message reporting a water purification failure, a shortage of fresh water. Routine, innocent. Days later, Japanese intercepts reported that AF is short of water. It was Midway. In that moment, the battle changed. Because now the United States didn't just suspect an attack, they knew it was coming. They knew roughly when, they knew roughly how, they even knew the composition of the Japanese strike force. The trap Japan believed it was setting had already been exposed. Admiral Chester Nimitz now faced a decision just as weighty as Nagumo's would later become. His carrier strength was limited. Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown still scarred from the Battle of the Coral Sea. On paper, it wasn't enough. The Japanese fleet was larger, more experienced, more confident. But Nimitz had something Nagumo did not: foreknowledge. Instead of reacting to events, he could shape them. Instead of chasing shadows across the Pacific, he could position his carriers exactly where they needed to be, northeast of Midway, hidden beyond the horizon. It was a gamble of breathtaking scale. If the intelligence was wrong, the American carriers would be isolated and destroyed. If it was right, they would be waiting in ambush. The difference between annihilation and victory now rested not on firepower, but on interpretation. In Tokyo, the Japanese High Command believed their communications were secure. They trusted the complexity of JN-25. They trusted their planning. They trusted the psychological shock of Pearl Harbor to have crippled American initiative. They never imagined that the enemy was reading enough of their traffic to anticipate the choreography of their movements. And so the Midway operation unfolded with confidence. Yamamoto's grand design involved multiple task forces spread across vast distances: a main carrier strike force under Nagumo, an invasion force, a battleship group trailing behind, and a northern diversion aimed at the Aleutians. It was brilliant in theory, but complexity creates vulnerability. By scattering their strength across the Pacific, the Japanese reduced the immediate support available to Nagumo's carriers. The battleships that could have reinforced him were too far away. The invasion force lagged behind. Coordination depended on precise timing and secure communications, and those communications were no longer secure. Meanwhile, American carriers slipped into position undetected. Radio silence, strict discipline. They trusted the codebreakers enough to sail toward the danger instead of away from it. Imagine the tension aboard those ships. Sailors knew they were outnumbered. Pilots understood the reputation of the Japanese air crews they would soon face. There was no illusion of invincibility here, only resolve. Because if Midway fell, Hawaii would be next, and if Hawaii fell, the Pacific might belong to Japan for years. The Americans were not fighting for expansion, they were fighting to prevent collapse. That difference matters. On the night before the battle, two fleets moved toward each other through the darkness, separated by hundreds of miles of ocean and an ocean of assumptions. Nagumo believed he was advancing into surprise. Nimitz knew he was setting the ambush. The most powerful carrier force in the world was sailing directly toward an enemy that had already anticipated its arrival. But intelligence alone does not win battles, it merely creates opportunity. The Americans still had to strike first. They still had to survive the inevitable Japanese counterattack. They still had to transform fragments of decrypted messages into coordinated action under fire. As dawn approached on June 4, 1942, the Pacific Ocean appeared serene, a vast, indifferent expanse of blue. Beneath that calm surface, history was about to pivot. In Pearl Harbor's underground intelligence rooms, men who would never fire a shot had already shaped the coming hours. Their pencils and codebooks had redrawn the battlefield. And far out at sea, beyond the curve of the earth, 3 American carriers waited in silence. They were exactly where the Japanese believed they would never be, waiting.
Dawn, June 4, 1942. The first wave of Japanese aircraft rises from the decks in perfect sequence, engines roaring, propellers slicing through humid Pacific air. Below them, the carriers cut white scars through the water. Everything is disciplined, controlled, predictable. Admiral Nagumo watches the launch unfold with professional calm. This is familiar territory. Strike first, assess damage, strike again if necessary. Maintain flexibility in case the American fleet appears. Flexibility. That word will become fatal. The first reports from Midway begin to trickle back. Anti-aircraft fire was heavier than expected. American fighters were present. The island is burning, but not neutralized. Airfield still operational. A second strike will be required. It's inconvenient, but not alarming. Nagumo has a reserve strike force waiting below deck. Aircraft armed with torpedoes designed for ships. If American carriers appear, they must be destroyed immediately. But if no fleet is nearby, those torpedoes are useless against land targets. Bombs would be more effective. Doctrine is clear. Eliminate the island threat first. Then, at 7:28 a.m., a message arrives from a scout plane launched late from the cruiser Tone. Sighted what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships. 10 ships, but no mention of carriers. Nagumo pauses. 10 ships could mean anything. Transports, cruisers, a small task force, not necessarily the American carriers he is hunting. And the report is incomplete, vague, frustratingly slow in detail. Minutes tick by. The Admiral faces a dilemma that will later be dissected by historians, but in that moment it is simply a command decision under uncertainty. If he prepares his reserve aircraft for anti-ship attack and no carriers are present, he wastes precious time and leaves Midway's airfield intact. If he commits to a second land strike and American carriers suddenly appear, his planes will be improperly armed. He chooses to rearm for land attack. It is not reckless, it is not emotional, it is textbook. Below deck, crews begin the dangerous process of swapping ordnance. Torpedoes are removed, bombs are brought up, fuel lines remain connected, aircraft are shuffled, repositioned, tightly packed wingtip to wingtip in the hangar decks. It is controlled chaos. Then another message arrives. The scout plane updates its report. Enemy force includes what appears to be a carrier. Now everything changes. A carrier. Somewhere out there beyond the horizon, the very target Yamamoto sought has revealed itself. Nagumo reverses his order. Rearm again. Torpedoes back onto the aircraft. More movement, more exposed fuel hoses, more explosives lying temporarily unsecured. The hangar decks grow increasingly crowded, planes half-armed, half-fueled, awaiting clarity, and clarity does not come quickly. What Nagumo does not know is that American aircraft are already in the air. From the decks of Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, squadrons have launched in fragmented waves. Coordination is imperfect, timing is messy. Some pilots fly the wrong headings, others struggle to locate the enemy across the endless ocean, but they are coming. At 9:20 a.m., the first American torpedo bombers arrive. They are slow, obsolete, vulnerable. Japanese Zero fighters descend upon them with ruthless efficiency. One by one, the American planes are shot down. They press on anyway, flying low over the waves, holding steady under withering fire, trying to release torpedoes before exploding into the sea. They fail. Not a single torpedo finds its mark. From Nagumo's perspective, it is validation. His combat air patrol is performing flawlessly. The American attack seems disorganized, desperate. The illusion of superiority remains intact. But something subtle is happening above him. To intercept the low-flying torpedo bombers, Japanese fighters have descended to near sea level. The sky at high altitude is thinning of protection. The carriers are maneuvering violently to avoid torpedoes, decks temporarily unusable for launching or recovering aircraft. And below deck, the rearming process is still incomplete. Fuel vapors linger, bomb carts are mid-transfer, torpedoes lie exposed. At 10:20 a.m., lookouts aboard the Japanese carriers glance upward. Tiny silhouettes pierce the clouds. American dive bombers. They were not coordinated with the torpedo squadrons intentionally, but fate has synchronized them perfectly. While Japanese fighters are low and out of position, the sky above is nearly undefended. For a few eternal seconds, no one reacts. Then the screaming begins. Dauntless dive bombers tip over into near vertical dives from 14,000 feet. Air brakes howl. Pilots focus through vibrating sights on the flight decks below. On Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, decks are cluttered with huelled and armed aircraft preparing for launch. It is the worst possible moment. Bombs fall. On Kaga, the first explosions rip through the hangar deck. Fire blossoms instantly. Aviation fuel ignites like liquid sunlight. Shock waves tear through tightly packed aircraft. On Akagi, a single bomb punches through the flight deck and detonates among armed planes below. Flames surge upward. Smoke coils into the sky. On Soryu, multiple hits transform the carrier into a furnace within minutes. 6 minutes. That is all it takes. 3 carriers, the core of Japan's striking power, are mortally wounded before Nagumo can fully comprehend what is happening. The careful rearming, the precise doctrine, the disciplined hesitation, all of it has converged into catastrophe. The hangar decks, crowded due to indecision and shifting orders, become infernos. Damage control teams fight heroically, but the combination of fuel, bombs, and confined steel spaces makes survival impossible. Nagumo transfers his flag from Akagi to a cruiser, watching smoke pillars rise into the Pacific sky. The illusion of invincibility is gone. And the tragedy is this: the decision that doomed them was not irrational. It was not foolish. It was reasonable, based on the information available. But war punishes even reasonable choices when time is misjudged. In less than an hour, the balance of naval power in the Pacific has shifted. And yet, the battle is not over. One carrier remains untouched, Hiryu, and from her decks, a final counterpunch is about to rise.
Smoke towers thousands of feet into the sky. From horizon to horizon, black columns mark the graves of 3 carriers that only an hour earlier represented the sharp edge of Japan's naval supremacy. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu. Their decks are twisted, their hangars infernos, their crews fighting flames that will not be contained. And yet, the battle is not finished. Out there, moving through the chaos and drifting smoke, one carrier remains untouched. Hiryu. Her flight deck is intact, her aircraft are fueled, her pilots have watched their sister ships burn, and now they are preparing to strike back. Inside Hiryu's ready rooms there is no panic, only intensity. They understand what has happened. They understand the scale of the disaster. But they also understand something else. If they can cripple the American carriers now, the battle might still be salvaged. Revenge lifts off first. Dive bombers roar from Hiryu's deck, climbing into the bright Pacific sky. They follow contact reports, scanning the ocean for the American fleet that has just delivered a devastating blow. Soon they spot her, USS Yorktown. To Japanese pilots, she appears isolated, vulnerable. They dive. Bombs whistle downward. Explosions erupt across Yorktown's deck. Fires break out. Smoke pours into the sky. For a moment, it seems the counterstrike has succeeded. American damage control teams scramble with relentless discipline, containing flames, restoring power, patching wounds with astonishing speed. Within an hour, Yorktown is operational again. The Japanese pilots, returning to Hiryu, report that they have likely sunk a carrier. They are wrong, and the war will punish that miscalculation. Hiryu launches a second wave, torpedo bombers this time. They find Yorktown again. The carrier maneuvers hard, but 2 torpedoes slam into her hull. The impact is catastrophic. She lists heavily. Machinery spaces flood. This time, the damage is mortal. Yorktown is abandoned. For a brief, fragile moment, it feels as though balance has returned. 3 Japanese carriers destroyed, 1 American carrier sinking. But the Americans still have 2. Enterprise, Hornet, and they are searching. Late in the afternoon, American scout planes finally locate Hiryu. Alone, exposed, separated from the burning remains of the main strike force. It is her turn now. Dive bombers lift off from Enterprise. They are exhausted. Many have already flown combat sorties that day. Fuel calculations are tight, navigation uncertain, but they know what is at stake. When they break through the cloud cover and spot Hiryu below, steaming defiantly across open water, the moment feels almost inevitable. The Japanese carrier begins evasive maneuvers. Anti-aircraft guns thunder. Zeros climb desperately to intercept. It is not enough. American Dauntless bombers roll into their dives. Gravity becomes a weapon. Bombs fall with terrifying precision. One strikes near the forward elevator. Another detonates amidships. A third explodes toward the stern. Flames erupt almost instantly. Aviation fuel ignites. The flight deck becomes a furnace. Within minutes, Hiryu is mortally wounded. 4 carriers, 4 pillars of Japan's naval power, all burning. As night falls over the Pacific, the scale of the catastrophe settles in. The Kido Butai, the elite carrier strike force that had stunned the world at Pearl Harbor, has been shattered in a single day. And it was not just steel that was lost, it was experience. The pilots who had trained for years, who had mastered coordinated strikes with surgical precision, many are gone. Japan cannot replace them quickly. Its training pipeline is too slow, its industrial capacity too limited. Ships can be rebuilt. Veteran air crews cannot. Meanwhile, American carriers withdraw eastward, battered but alive. They have suffered losses. Yorktown will eventually sink after a submarine attack. Dozens of aircraft are gone. Hundreds of men are dead. But the strategic balance has flipped. The illusion of Japanese invincibility has not merely cracked, it has collapsed. In Tokyo, shock spreads through the naval command. The operation that was meant to lure and annihilate the American fleet has instead annihilated Japan's own offensive spearhead. And the worst realization is this: the Americans were not lucky, they were prepared. As dawn rises on June 5th, Japanese ships begin to withdraw. Yamamoto considers pressing the battle with his battleships under cover of darkness, but coordination has dissolved. Confusion reigns. The opportunity is gone. Retreat becomes inevitable. But even in retreat, the Pacific is unforgiving. Days later, during the chaotic withdrawal, Japanese cruisers Mogami and Mikuma collide in the darkness while maneuvering to avoid a perceived submarine threat. Steel scrapes against steel, hulls are torn open, fuel leaks into the sea. American aircraft find them. Mikuma is bombed relentlessly. Fires consume her. She sinks beneath the waves, another loss in a battle that was supposed to expand an empire. By the time the sea finally grows quiet, the magnitude of Midway is undeniable. Japan has lost 4 fleet carriers, a heavy cruiser, hundreds of aircraft, and, most devastatingly of all, irreplaceable aviators. The Americans have lost 1 carrier. From this moment forward, the strategic initiative in the Pacific will slowly, relentlessly shift. Midway was not the largest naval battle of the war, but it was the turning point. Because power in the Pacific no longer belonged exclusively to the rising sun. The sky had changed hands. And somewhere far away, in a quiet intelligence office in Hawaii, the men who had broken the code understood something profound. This was only the beginning.
The ocean is quiet again. Where 4 Japanese carriers once ruled the horizon, there is now only drifting wreckage, oil-slicked waves, and the faint glow of dying fires beneath the surface. The Battle of Midway is over, but its consequences are only beginning to unfold. Admiral Yamamoto, still hundreds of miles away with his battleships, faces a truth no commander wants to accept. The decisive victory he envisioned has turned into strategic disaster. The plan had been intricate, ambitious, almost theatrical in its precision. Instead, it has exposed fatal weaknesses, overconfidence, divided forces, and a dangerous underestimation of American resilience. The order to withdraw spreads through the Japanese fleet. Retreat in wartime is never orderly. It is tense, uncertain, haunted by the fear that the enemy is still watching. And the Americans are watching. During the chaotic pullback, in darkness thick with anxiety, the heavy cruisers Mogami and Mikuma attempt evasive maneuvers after reports of a possible submarine. In the confusion, steel meets steel. The collision tears open hull plating. Mogami is crippled. Mikuma is badly damaged. Speed drops. Formation fractures. Damage control teams fight to contain flooding and fuel leaks, but the ships are vulnerable now, slower, exposed, wounded. American reconnaissance aircraft soon locate them. Dive bombers descend once more. For Mikuma, there will be no escape. Bombs detonate across her decks. Fires spread uncontrollably. Explosions ripple through her structure. She rolls and sinks beneath the Pacific, taking hundreds of sailors with her. Even in retreat, Midway continues to claim victims. But the deeper wound is not measured in ships alone. Japan has lost 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, the core of its elite First Air Fleet. More devastating still are the veteran air crews who went down with them. These were not easily replaced pilots. They were the product of years of rigorous pre-war training, disciplined coordination, and combat experience stretching back to China and Pearl Harbor. The Imperial Navy's training system cannot quickly produce replacements of equal caliber. The industrial base cannot match America's growing output. Time, once Japan's ally in rapid expansion, has turned against it. Across the Pacific, American shipyards are already accelerating production. New Essex-class carriers are under construction. Aircraft factories are expanding. Training programs are scaling up. Midway did not end the war, but it ended Japan's offensive momentum. From this point forward, the Japanese Navy will increasingly fight a defensive campaign, reacting, conserving, hoping to inflict enough losses to force negotiation. That hope will fade slowly, because intelligence, the silent force that helped shape Midway, will continue to influence the war.
Months later, in April 1943, American codebreakers intercept another crucial message. It details the inspection tour of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself, the architect of Pearl Harbor and Midway. His flight itinerary is precise: departure times, routes, aircraft type. Once again, information becomes a weapon. 16 American P-38 fighters are dispatched on a long-range interception mission over the Solomon Islands. The operation is meticulously planned. Fuel margins are razor-thin. Navigation must be exact. If they are late by minutes, the opportunity vanishes. They are not late. Over Bougainville, American fighters intercept Yamamoto's aircraft. In a brief, violent engagement, his plane is shot down into the jungle below. The same invisible war of codes that exposed Midway has now reached into the cockpit of Japan's most respected admiral. It is a symbolic moment. Midway shattered Japan's carrier strength. Operation Vengeance demonstrates that the intelligence advantage remains firmly in American hands. The war will grind on for 3 more brutal years across Guadalcanal, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, battles larger in scale, casualties heavier, technology more advanced. But historians will return again and again to those 6 minutes over Midway, because in those minutes the myth of inevitability collapsed. Japan had believed it could dictate the tempo of war, that boldness and precision would overwhelm a slower, industrially focused opponent, that shock would break morale. Instead, Midway revealed something fundamental. Adaptation beats arrogance. Intelligence can offset numerical strength, and even the most powerful fleet afloat can be undone by a handful of well-timed decisions. For the sailors who fought there, it was chaos, smoke, fear, and survival. For the nations involved, it was a pivot. And for history, it was proof that wars are often decided long before the first bomb falls, in code rooms, in cautious calculations, in moments of hesitation that seem minor at the time. The Pacific would never look the same again after June 22, 1942. The rising sun would still fly over vast territories, but it would never again command the ocean with unquestioned confidence. Midway was not just a battle. It was the moment the tide turned.